witnesses. A 16-year-old girl crying in her seat before halftime. And the person who caused it wasn't a heckler in the cheap seats. She was one of the actual owners of the team on the court. If you think you already know this story because you saw a headline scroll by, stay with me, because the headline barely scratches what actually happened inside that building. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why a single post-game quote from a role player turned into a national controversy that reached all the way to the White House podium. Here's where it starts. Her name is Sophie Cunningham. If you don't follow the WNBA closely, that name might not mean much to you yet, and that's kind of the point. She's not the face of the league. She's not the one selling out arenas on her own or breaking scoring records. She plays for the Indiana Fever. She's a role player, a defender, a teammate, the kind of player who does the unglamorous work that keeps a superstar like Caitlin Clark upright and protected when the games get physical and the officiating gets inconsistent. If you've watched Fever games this season, you've probably noticed her. She's the one getting in the middle of scuffles. She's the one talking trash on Clark's behalf when nobody else steps up. Off the court, up until a few weeks ago, she was mostly known for being outspoken and a little chaotic on social media, not for making national news. That changed because of one interview. ESPN sat down with Cunningham for a feature profile, and at some point the conversation turned to a topic that most professional athletes spend their entire careers dodging: transgender athletes competing in women's sports. Most players, when that question comes up, give you the safe answer. They talk about respect, they talk about inclusion in the vaguest possible terms, and they move on before anyone can pin them down. Cunningham didn't do that. She said plainly that she doesn't believe biological men should be competing against biological women in female sports categories. She tied it to Title IX, to the protections that she believes built women's sports in the first place, the same protections that, in her view, made it possible for someone like Caitlin Clark to have a stage at all. And then she added something that a lot of people conveniently left out when they clipped the interview for outrage bait. She said she doesn't hate anyone, that she believes there's room at the table for everybody, and that disagreeing with someone doesn't mean you have to be cruel to them. Now, normally this is the part of the story where the athlete gets buried under criticism for 48 hours, issues a soft-focus clarification through a publicist, and the news cycle quietly moves on. That's the standard playbook. Cunningham skipped it entirely. When reporters came back at her days later, clearly hoping she'd walk it back, she said almost the exact same thing again. Same conviction, same framing about love and truth going together, no backpedaling. And that, more than the original comment itself, is what turned this into a full-blown story. Because an athlete who says something controversial and then apologizes is a 24-hour story. An athlete who says something controversial and then calmly repeats it under pressure is a different kind of story entirely. It's a story about conviction, and those spread. Within about 48 hours, this had completely outgrown the sports world. USA Today picked it up. ESPN was running panel discussions about it. Fox News gave it a dedicated segment. And then, in a moment that tells you exactly how far this had traveled, the White House press secretary was asked about it directly and said publicly that Cunningham was on the side of the argument most Americans already agree with. Think about the scale of that for a second. A bench player on a WNBA team gives one honest answer in one feature interview, and less than 2 days later people at the White House press briefing are weighing in on it. That doesn't happen because of one clever soundbite. That happens because the question underneath it, who gets to compete in women's sports and who gets to decide, has been sitting there, unresolved, for years, waiting for a spark. And the reaction split exactly the way you'd expect in this current climate. One side treated her comments as basic common sense, the kind of thing most people privately believe but are too afraid to say out loud in a workplace that punishes dissent. The other side treated it as an attack, framing it as targeting an already vulnerable community and using a sports platform to push a political agenda into a space that's supposed to be about basketball. Both of those reactions are out there right now, loudly, and this video isn't here to tell you which one is correct. What it is here to do is walk you through what actually happened next, because what happened next is where this stopped being an online argument and became something that hurt an actual teenager in a very public way. Back in the league, things got personal fast. When the Fever traveled to play the Seattle Storm, the tension around Cunningham's comments had already fully attached itself to that specific matchup, partly because of the ongoing, unresolved friction between the Fever and the Storm's roster that fans had been dissecting all season, and partly because Seattle, as a city and as an organization, leans hard into a specific kind of progressive branding. Storm center Stephanie Dolson wore a t-shirt into the arena that night reading, "Trans rights are human rights." A clear and pointed statement given everything swirling around the Cunningham interview. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said a word. The team didn't comment on it. She wore a political statement on her chest to a professional basketball game, and it was treated as completely unremarkable. Outside the arena before tip-off, a different scene was building. A crowd had gathered, not enormous, but visible, made up of people who'd shown up specifically because of the Cunningham interview and the larger conversation it had ignited, including supporters of a Washington state ballot initiative, Initiative 638, that would restrict biological males from competing in girls' K through 12 athletics. Some wore shirts from a brand called XXXY Athletics, a company whose entire identity is built around opposing trans participation in women's sports. Some carried signs. It wasn't one unified protest with one message. It was a mix of people who all felt like this specific game, in this specific arena, on this specific night, had become the place where a national argument was about to play out in real time. Two of those people made it inside and took seats courtside. Two teenage girls, both 16 years old, wearing their XXXY athletic shirts, holding a handmade sign that read, "Thank you, Sophie, for speaking up for girls," with another that said something like, "We love you, Sophie." That's it. That's the entire content of what they brought into that building. No slurs, no attacks on any specific player, nothing aimed at anyone by name. Just gratitude toward a player they admired, expressed the same way fans have expressed support for athletes forever, with a sign and a t-shirt. By every account from people sitting near them, they were being completely respectful. Not shouting, not confronting anyone walking by, not blocking anyone's view, just sitting there watching a basketball game like everyone else who paid for a ticket. One of them later said she'd braced herself for online hate before the game, because she knew what she was wearing and holding might draw attention on social media, and she'd more or less made peace with that. What she wasn't braced for was what actually happened. A woman approached them. According to the girl's account, the interaction started almost gently. The woman asked what they were doing, and then told them Jesus loves everyone, a sentiment the girl said she actually agreed with, since she described herself as religious. But then the tone flipped completely. The woman told them she hoped Jesus would forgive them for what they'd done, called them, in her words, effing insane, and told them to knock it off and put the sign away. This wasn't whispered. This happened in full view, courtside, in a building packed with thousands of people, during a live professional sporting event. Independent journalist Brandy Cruz was seated nearby, and says she tried to get arena security involved on the spot, arguing that this kind of language was a clear violation of the venue's own code of conduct. Climate Pledge Arena explicitly prohibits abusive language and reserves the right to eject people over it. According to Cruz, security told her to email the front office instead. Nothing happened in the moment. No ejection, no intervention, nothing that stopped it from continuing to play out in front of a stadium full of people who mostly just kept watching the game. By halftime, one of the girls was in tears. Cruz described looking over and seeing her sobbing, and later spoke about how much the moment had meant to these girls before any of this happened. They'd stayed up the night before making their signs, excited for what they thought was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see players they admired up close. Instead, that night became the thing they'll probably remember first when they think about this year. And here's the detail that turned this from an ugly fan interaction into a full-blown institutional scandal. The woman who confronted them wasn't just some random spectator with strong opinions and no filter. She was identified as Celeste Keaton, a minority co-owner of the Seattle Storm. Not a fan in the upper deck. Not a season ticket holder who'd had one too many drinks. A woman with actual ownership stake in the franchise, walking down to courtside seats and berating two 16-year-olds until one of them broke down crying. In a building where a player on her own team had been allowed to wear a political statement on a t-shirt without a single person batting an eye. The story didn't stay contained. Within a day, it was everywhere, and the league had a full-blown mess on its hands. The WNBA moved relatively fast by the standards of how these situations usually get handled. Keaton was fined an undisclosed amount, and suspended from attending the Storm's next 5 home games. On paper, that looks like accountability. And to be fair, plenty of people did note that the response came quickly compared to how slowly these things sometimes move in professional sports. Then came the statement from the team's majority owner, Ginny Gilder. It acknowledged that a co-owner had made comments to 2 fans at the previous night's game. It said the organization was sorry that happened. It said everyone who attends a Storm game deserves to feel welcome, and that the team remains committed to creating an inclusive environment where every fan is treated with respect. Read it once, and it sounds reasonable. Read it twice and notice what it actually leaves out. It doesn't name Keaton directly in the apology language itself. It doesn't describe what was actually said to those girls. It doesn't address why a co-owner felt she had the standing to personally confront paying customers over what they were wearing and holding. And it definitely doesn't touch the obvious question sitting right underneath the surface. If the arena is supposed to be a place where everyone feels welcome regardless of what they believe, why did a player wearing one political message get total silence, while 2 teenagers expressing the opposite message got a screaming co-owner and a security escort? That asymmetry is really the heart of why this story kept growing instead of dying down after the suspension was announced. It's not really about whether you personally agree with Cunningham's position on the underlying issue, and it's not about whether you think the Storm player had every right to wear whatever shirt she wanted, which, to be clear, she absolutely did. It's about the fact that inside that one building, on that one night, one political message was treated as completely normal and another was treated as a threat serious enough to warrant a co-owner personally shutting it down in front of a packed crowd. Whatever you believe about the debate itself, that kind of one-directional tolerance is the part that's hard to defend from any angle. Cunningham herself didn't say anything publicly the night it happened. She wasn't made available to reporters after the game. But the next day, she went to social media and made her position clear without going anywhere near a walkback. She said she genuinely believes there's a safe space and love for everybody. Biological girls, biological boys, trans women, trans men, everyone welcome at her table, and that you can disagree with someone and still be kind to them. And then she made a point of praising the 2 girls directly, telling them she was proud of them for standing up for what they believe, and hinting they'd be hearing from her. It was the same posture she'd held since the original ESPN interview. No apology for her position, but a clear line drawn against how those girls were treated. Meanwhile, the Fever organization moved fast to put distance between themselves and the demonstration outside the arena. When head coach Stephanie White was asked about the rally during her post-game press conference, a team representative actually stepped in before she could fully answer and stated plainly that neither the organization nor Cunningham had any knowledge of the demonstration or any contact with whoever organized it. That's a notable detail on its own. The team wanted it on the record, immediately, that this wasn't some coordinated campaign. Cunningham said what she said in an interview weeks earlier. She didn't organize a rally. She didn't ask anyone to show up outside an arena in Seattle with signs and t-shirts. All of that happened around her, generated by people who felt strongly enough about her comments to travel and show up in person, completely independent of anything she orchestrated. Underneath all of this sits a bigger, messier context that's worth understanding, because it explains why this specific city, this specific arena, and this specific matchup became the flashpoint. Washington State has an active ballot initiative, Initiative 638, set to go before voters that would restrict students defined as biologically male from competing in certain girls' K through 12 athletic events. That initiative has already been generating heated local debate for months, completely separate from anything happening in the WNBA. Some of the people outside Climate Pledge Arena that night weren't there purely because of Cunningham. They were there because this game, in this city, at this moment, gave them a visible platform to make noise about a fight that's already playing out at the ballot box. Cunningham's comments didn't create that fight. They just happened to land right in the middle of it, at exactly the moment tensions were already rising. And then there's the layer almost nobody wants to say out loud directly, but that's been circling since the moment the ESPN interview aired, the unspoken tension between Cunningham's team and Brittney Griner. For a while now, Fever Storm matchups have carried an edge that goes beyond normal competitive rivalry, with fans dissecting uncalled physical plays and questioning whether games involving Clark get officiated consistently. Cunningham never named Griner in her comments. She spoke in general terms about a policy position, nothing more. But given the history between these two teams, plenty of fans immediately connected dots that Cunningham herself never explicitly drew. Griner, in a separate interview released just days before all of this exploded, mentioned in passing that playing against Cunningham is frustrating. She didn't elaborate, didn't explain what she meant, and has never directly addressed whether Cunningham's ESPN comments were aimed at her in any way. Make of that timing what you will. It's a silence that's been sitting there since this all started, and nobody's filled it in yet. So where does that leave everyone? Keaton is serving her 5-game suspension. The fine has been paid. The team's statement has been issued and largely faded from the news cycle the way these statements are designed to. Cunningham is still playing, still saying exactly what she said in that ESPN interview, without softening a single word of it. And somewhere out there are two 16-year-old girls who stayed up the night before a game, making handmade signs to say thank you to a player they admired, who instead walked out of that arena having been sworn at by a woman who partially owns the building, with one of them crying before the game had even reached halftime. You can debate the underlying issue endlessly, and people absolutely are. That debate isn't going away anytime soon, and it shouldn't be flattened into something simple just because it's uncomfortable. But strip away the politics for 1 second and look at just the bare mechanics of what happened inside that arena. A co-owner of a professional sports team walked up to two teenagers over a sign that thanked an athlete, and it ended with one of them in tears in front of thousands of people, while nobody nearby stepped in to stop it as it was happening. Whatever side of this you land on, that part isn't really a close call. What this whole situation leaves behind isn't really a question about Sophie Cunningham or Celeste Keaton or the Seattle Storm specifically. It's a bigger question about what happens when leagues that build their public identity around inclusion and protecting women get tested by a moment that actually forces them to define which side of that they're protecting and who exactly counts as welcome in their buildings. That's the question worth sitting with after the suspension's been served and the statements have been archived and the next news cycle has already moved on to something else. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think the WNBA's response actually matched what happened? Or was a 5-game suspension too light for a co-owner reducing a teenager to tears in front of a sold-out crowd? Drop your take in the comments, because I guarantee this section is going to get heated and I want to see where you land on it. If this video kept you hooked all the way through, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to see stories like this laid out properly instead of chopped into a 15-second clip. Subscribe if you want more deep dives that go past the headline and actually explain what happened and why it matters. And if you know someone who's been following this story, send this their way, because most people online only got half of it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.